Welcome back to Ladies Night. It looks a little bit different. It still looks a little different than it did a couple weeks ago when we were able to gather with you in person. And my heart's aching for that normalcy back, that community. I wish that this looked a lot different than it did last week, but here we are. We're digital again, and we're here for another conversation about the feminine genius. So if this is your first time to Ladies Night tuning in with us, each night we sit with each other and break down a piece of what John Paul II calls the feminine genius. And put simply, it's the way that women journey back to the Lord's heart, uniquely as his daughters. So we've had conversations about receptivity, what it means to be actively open to God's grace and his love and his mission in our lives. We've had conversations about what it means to be generous as women, which is especially unique now in this time where hospitality and generosity and giving of ourselves looks so radically different in this season that we're in now. And tonight I want to have a conversation with you about sensitivity. So in American Sign Language, when you learn, it's not uncommon for you to be given what is called a sign name, especially if your name is really long to spell out in conversation when someone's wanting to talk to you. So when I was little, here's an example of one. My little sister's name is Madison, which is long and hard to spell out if you're a little kid. So we gave her a sign name so that in conversation we could call out to her and she could know that we were talking to her. And so Maddie has this beautiful red hair that we all loved growing up and we still love. And so her sign name was Red M. Maddie. So instead of having to spell out Madison, we could just sign her name and she'd know we were calling her. And your sign name is usually a combination of characteristics like red hair, or if you're short or tall or little, just different ways to recognize your inherent characteristics as a person and your name so that you can be called. So when I was learning sign language when I was small, my mom asked all of us siblings, I'm the oldest of 8, to give sign names to each other, to give each other a sign name. And when it came to my turn, I was a little nervous, because usually siblings know just the right buttons to push when giving things like sign names to each other. And my siblings were talking back and forth with each other and trying to figure out what my name would be, how they would call me. And they ended on, instead of Chloe in conversation, this. And if you were to break down the sign, it's compassionate with a C. And I couldn't figure out why that was the name they gave me. And my little sisters talked about how we sat on the couch with you and watched you cry over a lot of movies, and you seem to be a deep feeler, like we know you, and this is who you are. You're compassionate. You have a big heart. And there have been times in my story where I have thought that having a big heart, seeing others with my heart, being sensitive, is a flaw, is a character weakness that I need to overcome in order to be a strong woman. But the more that I learned about what John Paul II has to say about sensitivity and how women have this unique ability to see people with our hearts, the more I realized, and I'm still coming to realize, I'm still on this journey, that sensitivity isn't a weakness, but it's a strength. That it takes courage to see others with our hearts. And if we gave up our sensitivity, we would be giving up so much. We'd be giving up our creativity, the passion that drives the decisions that we make, our ability to see others, to see them. And John Paul II writes how we see and we go out to help. It drives us to action. We see others in their hearts. And sensitivity can be messy and it can be inconvenient. And so it's easy then to think, well, I don't need that. But it's so integral to who we are as women. To be able to see others with our hearts. My journey to embracing sensitivity in my own daily life is still ongoing, but there are 2 stories that have radically changed the way that I think about sensitivity and how the Lord has made us with this beautiful gift as women that we live out uniquely as women. And so tonight, in just our short conversation here, me talking to you and you hopefully watching through a screen, I want to share those 2 stories that have changed the way that I think about sensitivity. So the first is my absolute all-time favorite story in the Gospels. And it's found in Mark 5. I'm going to read it. I have my blessed is she journaling Bible here. that I love reading with. So it's in Mark chapter 5, starting in verse 25. There was a woman afflicted with hemorrhages for 12 years, and she had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet she was not helped, she only grew worse. She had heard about Jesus, and she came up behind him in a crowd, and she touched his cloak. She said, "If I but touch his clothes, I shall be cured." Immediately her flow of blood dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed from an affliction. Jesus, aware at once the power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see how the crowd is pressing upon you, and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. The woman, realizing what had happened to her, approached him in fear and trembling. And she fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction." Why did this change the way that I think of sensitivity? In this story, you have a woman whose story is wrapped in shame. So just a historical background, this woman is Jewish, and if she was bleeding, she would have been seen as unclean. And if she was unclean, she couldn't worship at the temple. She was seen as unclean by even friends and family. And if they interacted with her, then they'd be unclean too. And they couldn't go to temple to worship God. And so she's outcast. Her story is messy. Friends and family see her as unclean. And she's living in shame. So much so that when she hears about Jesus, instead of desiring a face-to-face encounter with him, she just wants the hem of his garment. So she comes up from behind him and just touches the hem. But that's all Jesus needs, right? For healing. We just have to open the door just a little bit to him with that receptivity that we talked about a couple weeks ago. So she touches this hem of his garment and she's healed. Jesus heals her, and he knows he's healed her, and she knows she's been healed. And so he begins to look for her. He could have just let her go on, right? He could have just let this healing be a moment between the two of them. They both knew what happened. But instead, he begins to look for her because he knows her story and he wants to encounter her. And she looks at him. He calls her to that face-to-face relationship. She says, it's me. It's me. The reason the power's gone out of you is me. You've healed me. And she tells him the whole truth. Her whole story. And I love this line. He says to her, Daughter, your faith has saved you. He calls her into relationship with him. She would have been content with just the hem of the garment, right? But he yearns for just a fullness of life and a total encounter with her. So much so that he calls her daughter. Beloved, I see you. He sees her. Jesus Christ sees this woman with his heart. He sees all her brokenness. He sees all her pain. He sees all her desire to be made well. And he loves her. He says, go in peace. Be cured of your affliction. So in this story, Jesus is just showing absolute sensitivity to who she is as a person. So then my second story, right? There's two. We're getting ready to enter into Holy Week. And I love praying the Stations of the Cross on Friday, especially on Good Friday in a particular way. And there's a station where Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. Can you imagine the road to Calvary, walking this path in the Holy Land? The road is tight. It's crowded. It's loud. You have the Lord, and he's walking to his death. He's going to die for love of us, for love of you, for love of you. And he's sweating, and he's bloody, and he's messy. And even those who he loves and who love him and who have been in relationship and friendship with him for 3 years of his ministry, they're scattered, right? At the cross, at the foot of the cross, only John the Beloved will be there. He's outcast, a man from whom we turn our face. We held him in no esteem. And the soldiers are, trying to do crowd control and work the Lord up to Calvary. And out of the crowd comes this woman. And she sees Jesus when everyone is casting him away. And she sees him and his story. And she sees him with her heart. And she's unashamed of her love for him. And she goes up and she wipes his face. And she encounters a bloodied Lord whose love for her is so radical and ridiculous. Whose love for you is so radical and ridiculous that she wipes his face. And she wipes his face, and he leaves an image of his face on her veil. And traditionally, we call this woman Veronica. Veronica, true, veritas, the name, the meaning of her name, true icon. She's revealing the true face of Jesus. Yes, on her veil, right? Yes. But ultimately in the way she acts, right? She's revealing the way Christ loves us in our messiness and our brokenness, and he desires to encounter us. And she, and her beautiful sensitivity to his story, is able to overcome any shame. Here I am, approaching this man who everyone else seems to have just outcast. Even his friends don't want to be around him. Even his friends have fled. And she encounters his bloodied, broken face and loves him. That's sensitivity, right? Not a weakness, not wearing your heart on your sleeve, not being so too emotional, all these kind of ways that sensitivity gets a bad rap in conversations. No, she is seeing him with her heart. And these two stories, the woman with hemorrhages in Mark 5, starting in verse 25, and the tradition of Veronica, the woman who wipes the face of Jesus, are beautiful on their own right. And they can help us understand sensitivity by just standalone stories. But the beauty comes, and I had a dear friend who taught me this a few summers back, is that some scripture scholars and the traditional thought is that the woman with hemorrhages in Mark 5 is Veronica. That this woman who the Lord encounters with his heart, and he teaches her sensitivity, the way he's created her to be as his daughter, and he encounters her messiness when everyone else has cast her away as unclean, is the same woman who during Holy Week, where we're just about to enter in, is the woman who encounters Jesus in his bloody mess of the cross and the passion and desires a face-to-face relationship so much with him that he leaves her an image of his face. And when you think about that, then those two stories that teach sensitivity so beautifully combine into this amazing reflection that I've been thinking and chewing on for years now. Because Christ made us for right relationship with him, and he's created us as women in a way that is so beautiful and good. And we learn from him how to be who we truly are. And then we get to console his heart too. So I just invite you, as we're diving deeper into what it means to be women, what it means to journey back to God's heart, especially as his daughter. He calls us daughter. What lies have you believed about sensitivity? Do you believe it's just this thing, wearing your heart on your sleeve, or it doesn't make you weak? And how is God inviting inviting you to radically change that? Inviting you to enter into a sensitivity that is seeing others with your heart and encountering the Lord with your heart, especially this Lent. So that's all I have for this evening. I wish I could just break into small groups with you and exist with you and hear your stories and hear how sensitivity plays a role in your life as a woman, uniquely in your own way that you live out the feminine genius. But I can't. But you can. So if maybe you're watching this and you have a friend that you want to have a meaningful conversation with, maybe share what struck you here in our time together this evening, and have a conversation with her about it. And just enter into discovering and diving deep into the feminine genius with the women in your life right now, with the women that the Lord is inviting you to get to know better in this season of lockdown and quarantines, when we may have a lot of time, a lot more time than normal, to really dive into right relationship with others. So God bless you. God bless your Lent. Know that I'm praying for every single one of you. And I'm praying that we're able to together enter into a joyful celebration of Easter.